NFL fans saw something concerning for probably the first time earlier today as Dolphins wide receiver DuBose was wheeled off on a stretcher with his pads and shirt entirely removed after a serious-looking injury. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and the goal in this channel is to teach you more about the medical side of the sports world, and in this case, try to provide a little bit of education and clarity on what we saw. And I want to update all this right off the bat. We've gotten word from the Dolphins that DuBose is in stable condition. They're keeping him out, of course, with concern for a head injury, as we saw reported on their social media accounts. And so this is very reassuring that, number one, they're saying head injury, they're not saying neck injury, and also that he's in stable condition. So despite everything concerning that we saw initially, it seems that a lot of this was just trying to be preventative or precautionary. The fact that he's in stable condition tells us very reassuring evidence of no concern for like cardiac arrest, or at least hopefully nothing more scary than what we saw on the field. But let's talk through, number one, the mechanism. We'll then talk through all the different protocols that led to everything we're seeing here with his pads completely off and exposed. We saw blood pressure cuff, potentially IV, EKG. So let's walk through it. So the hit itself raises concern for not only a neck injury, but also concussion from the kind of whiplash coup, counter coup thing that we talk about. And we can see the initial impact came in. DuBose catches the ball here. As he goes to come down, his head gets lowered, the defender comes in, and there's this impact onto the front of the head that twists the neck a little bit, and then he slams the back of his head down into the turf. On a little bit slower replay here, we see the same sort of thing and a little bit more clarity. That head gets lowered down. There's an initial shot that looks like it catches him a little bit on that right side of the head. The neck is going to get bent off to the left side and twisted awkwardly, which raises concern for the neck injury component of this, potentially cervical spinal cord. And then as he goes down to the ground, we see the back of his head whip backwards and slam onto the turf. So there's a couple different times, either when this initial hit came in where there could have been a concussion, or as he's falling back down to the ground, as that head goes backwards, the brain, boom, as the skull lands on the ground, the brain slams into the inside of the skull. You get this significant amount of mechanical shear stress and force all through the cells of the brain, causing at a minimum concern for a concussion, in addition to the concern for a neck injury. Now, we saw some initial concern for posturing here as well. This isn't the classic arm extended fencing response, but we saw with Tua, right, those arms rigid. Any of this rigidity that we can see in the limbs can be a sign of this posturing, this impact seizure that we'll see, where here his arms are rigid and flexed kind of up by his head. Not your classic fencing response, but very concerning for an outward sign of internal head trauma, or in this case, concussion. Next, we'll walk through the whole evaluation sequence here, the protocols of what we're going through, what we'll do in terms of the pads coming off, face mask, etc. But first, I'm gonna take a quick break to give a shout out to the sponsor of this video. Today's video is sponsored by Bombas. Let's get right to the point. Bombas makes the most comfortable socks that I have ever worn. And with sock season upon us, look no further than Bombas for a little bit of self-gifting or finding those perfect gifts for everybody on your holiday list. First of all, let's talk about the construction. Number one, they've got a really nice built-in arch support. I love the little heel guard on the backside and the classic seamless toe design, so you don't get that annoying feeling up at your toes. Next, the materials. Let me tell you, Bombas has the most fantastic materials, from a nice merino wool to a cashmere merino wool blend. And with a huge variety of selections, they've got everybody on your holiday list covered, even the little ones like my son, who absolutely loves running around in his little Bombas. Right now, if you head to bombas.com/BrianS, click the link in the description or scan the QR code, new customers are going to get 20% off their purchase. Get a great gift for yourself or anybody on your holiday shopping list, and also know that you're helping others in need. With one purchased equaling one donated, Bombas was founded on a mission of helping others and has donated over 140 million clothing items to people in need. Thank you again to Bombas for sponsoring today's video. Again, link in the description for new customers, 20% off your Bombas purchase. So first thing here, we see the medical staff get out onto the field, and excellent initial job. You see the hands are positioned up under the helmet to stabilize that cervical spine. This individual who's out here at the team, the head, I don't know if this is the athletic trainer, the physician, it doesn't really matter, but this person is kind of in charge here because they've got control of the neck, and that's going to be the most critical thing right away. Now, as we see the rest of the staff get out here, we see another individual come in. I'm guessing this might be one of the team doctors, just given that they're wearing a suit. And you can see now this person is starting to try and talk to Grant. We still have nice stability maintained to that cervical spine. You see him reaching at the hand, probably giving some instructions to try and see whether or not he can squeeze and has control in those extremities. And also in this initial sequence, you're also making sure that the player has a pulse, right? Because even though we're worried about the neck, we're worried about a concussion, you've got to make sure that you've got a heartbeat, that you don't have any crazy arrhythmias that could lead to cardiac arrest, and that you're breathing okay. So they're going to be doing all that as they go through this evaluation here, but initially it doesn't look like there was too much concern. So the next thing that we see here is things seem to be a little bit more intense, right? Now we've got the full spine board out here with all this different trauma gear. We've got EMS out on the field. Oftentimes these individuals in the red hat, at least historically, are the independent neurotrauma consultants, right? Anytime there's concern for spinal cord injury, neck injury, often these individuals are neurosurgeons or have training in neurology, so it's great that they're out there. At this point now, we can see those individuals from before right here have kind of stepped aside because likely we're starting to take over some of that emergency response crew with EMS that's there. Now, really like to see this as well. This is the same person who initially had control of the neck. And this is fantastic because once you get control of the cervical spine, it is not recommended to try and switch that to somebody else because moving that from one person to another runs the risk that something could get moved and make the injury worse. And so I love that we get a clear example here of that consistency of maintaining control of the cervical spine with who initially got control of the cervical spine. At this moment, right, we've made the decision, even if we're not concerned about spinal cord injury just right away, if the player is still unconscious, can't directly answer our questions, you assume spinal cord injury, you assume you're going to immobilize the spine and get them off to the hospital. And part of that by default involves taking off the face mask. If you have injury enough to the brain stem, you can have damage to the parts of the brain that control your autonomic nervous system function and things like breathing and heart rate. Remember, when you're asleep, you're still breathing. Your heart is still beating. When you're unconscious, you're still breathing. Your heart is still beating. All those processes happen automatically through this autonomic nervous system, and that can become impaired and dysregulated with either a cervical spine injury or an injury to the brain/brainstem, where all of those structures are being controlled from the motor neurons. So as you go through this process, we're almost always taking off the face mask so that if something happens, we have easier access to the airway to help with breathing. But by default, we aren't stripping athletes down all the way to get to the bare chest and the bare skin like we saw subsequent. So now in this view, we can see that the pads have been removed, the face mask, and it looks like helmet has been removed. We see he's in a cervical collar to stabilize the spine, but interestingly, his pads and his jersey have been removed to expose the skin. The only reason you are going to do this in this initial situation is if you are concerned about something happening to the heart. To get an EKG to assess the heart rhythm, which is what this box right here is doing, you need to be able to get to the skin. And so clearly there was something that transpired in their evaluation that made them concerned either about his heart not beating the right way or that there was going to be concern for that to possibly develop. In those cases, again, you're going to be extremely precautionary. You're going to cut off the pads, you're going to take off the jersey and put those monitor leads on so that you can start analyzing the heart rhythm. At this point, you've worked your way pretty far down the trauma list, and so you're going to have oxygen. You're going to go ahead and obtain IV access because if you do have a cardiac arrest episode, sometimes you're treating that with various medications, and so you need to have access to the veins to get those medicines in as quickly as possible. So the fact that we saw the jersey come off and the shirt come off with the skin exposed raises us to another level of concern where the medical staff evaluating him, EMS, had some reason to be worried about a possibility of abnormal heart rate or some type of cardiac involvement. Potentially IV access, it's hard to say for sure. You would assume if they're doing all of this, they probably are going to get IV access on the field. We can see this is called a nasal cannula up by his head. This is providing oxygen into the nasal passage. And this is not the most aggressive way to get somebody oxygen. If you're going to really do that, you're going to have a big face mask on, which delivers more oxygen. So there's levels again to how aggressive you're being with trying to administer supplemental oxygen, which is again part of that trauma cardiac concern pathway. Here we get a better view of those EKG leads. We see the wires coming down. He has a blood pressure cuff on his left arm. And so all things that are going to give you objective information about assessment of the cardiac condition, the heart condition, vital signs in this type of a situation. And yes, the arms are strapped down, so we can't necessarily see any sort of volitional movement, etc. But seeing all this with EKG leads, blood pressure monitor, oxygen, raises that concern for a higher level of concern with something like the heart, the lungs, beyond just worry to the brain and the spinal cord. Because remember, brain spinal cord injuries obviously can be extremely detrimental. You can have paralysis. You can die from a brain injury. But the thing that acutely is going to be most concerning is going to be if those injuries cause effect on the heart. With Damar Hamlin, it was different. Damar Hamlin got hit in the chest, went into a cardiac arrhythmia that resulted in cardiac arrest. There was no brain or neck involvement, but you can have secondary involvement of the heart from brain or neck injuries, and so that's what they're doing here to be prepared or potentially correct something. So that's it for the video. Again, something that I don't think in my years covering some of these and trying to provide education on YouTube, I've ever seen a situation with any athlete, other than obviously with Damar Hamlin, but seeing them with their not only helmet taken off, but also pads and shirt. But when you see that, remember that they're trying to do that because to evaluate the heart, you need to have access to the skin to get those EKG pads on. Again, very reassuring to hear the latest update that he's in stable condition, ruled out with a head injury as opposed to neck or heart or something like that. Presumably things seem to be developing in as more of a reassuring way as possible. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.